Ohayou gozaimasu. Good morning to our Washington audience and to those joining us online this morning. And thanks for braving this weather. I know it's getting pretty tough out there and schools are closing. I'm Dave Shear. I'm the Senior Associate with the Japan Chair at CSIS and former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia-Pacific Security Affairs. And I think I spoke here in 2015, and it's an honor and a pleasure to rejoin this event. Thank you very much. On behalf of CSIS and the Japan Institute of International Affairs, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 30th Annual U.S. Japan Security Seminar. For 3 decades, this event has played an important role in promoting a dialogue aimed at strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance. I'd briefly like to mention just a few of the milestones during the seminar's 30-year history that reflect the extent to which the alliance has evolved. First, we couldn't have gotten as far as we have without the 1995 Sasae Agreement and a continued commitment to ensuring the political sustainability of U.S. forces in Japan. On that basis, we've accomplished great things. The NIA Initiative of 1995 and the 1996 Joint Security Declaration anchored the new 1997 bilateral defense guidelines. Prime Minister Koizumi put Japanese boots on the ground in Iraq and strongly supported Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. Japan released its first national security strategy in 2013 amid a deteriorating regional security environment. Prime Minister Abe embarked on a series of defense policy reforms that ultimately allowed the exercise of collective self-defense in certain circumstances. And on this basis, Japan and the United States updated the bilateral defense guidelines to enhance alliance interoperability in 2015. A little over a year ago, Japan embarked on a new national security strategy and a robust defense buildup program. Prime Minister Kishida accomplished this while conducting a vigorous regional diplomacy designed to build closer cooperation with the ROK, the Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, and India, and of course the United States joined Prime Minister Kishida in this effort. To crown our efforts, President Biden hosted the U.S., Japan, and the ROK summit at Camp David in August. From the Camp David spirit emerged the historic commitment to consult and the extraordinary institutionalization of the trilateral relationship. There's always more to be done, and our two governments are working assiduously to ensure that this alliance remains a cornerstone of regional peace, stability, and the rule of law. Yesterday, a group of experts from both countries, a group of experts and friends, I should say, from both countries met privately to exchange views on priorities for future alliance cooperation. In a moment, I'll join my colleague Chris Johnstone and counterparts from Japan to reflect on the evolution of this critical relationship and highlight key themes from yesterday's dialogue. But we'd like to begin with a video greeting from Foreign Minister Kamikawa Yoko. We presented this at the beginning of our session yesterday, and we'll share this with you now to set the stage for our conversation today. The greeting is delivered in English, very good English, I should add. I note that the Foreign Minister is in the midst of a lengthy visit to Europe and the U.S. She visited Ukraine and pledged significant new assistance. Japan has already provided more than $7 billion in aid to Ukraine. Thanks again for joining us. And please direct your attention to the scenes for the video, right behind me. Thanks.
I am Kamikawa Yoko, Minister for Foreign Affairs. At the outset, I would like to extend my sincere condolences for the loss of 8 crew members due to the Osprey crash November last year, and to extend my deepest sympathy to their families. They devoted themselves to carrying out their missions day and night to maintain peace and security of Japan and the surrounding region. The deterrence by the Japan-U.S. alliance is made possible by the strong determination of the members of the U.S. forces like them, who risk their lives in carrying out their missions and with the support from their family members. I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations on the 30th anniversary of the Japan-U.S. Security Seminar. This seminar has been instrumental in drawing up the post-Cold War blueprint of our alliance. It is a great honor for me to send you this video message on this occasion. My aspiration to become a politician began 35 years ago when I studied in the United States and worked as a policy planning staff member for a U.S. senator. It was a valuable experience that allowed me to see Japan from abroad. I expect that today's public session will also provide valuable perspectives from legendary figures that have witnessed the Japan-U.S. alliance from various viewpoints over the years. In my speech, I would like to begin by explaining the role given to this seminar from the context of U.S. Japan relations at the time of its birth. The Japan-U.S. Security Seminar was launched in San Francisco in March 1995. It is thanks to the visionary sages in both countries that this seminar was made possible. The Cold War had ended only a few years before that, and faced with various difficulties. The state of alliance at that time was even described as alliance adrift. There were even extreme opinions that the U.S. military presence in Japan was no longer necessary. Against this backdrop, in April 1996, the year after the first Japan-U.S. Security Seminar was held, Prime Minister Hashimoto and President Clinton issued the Japan-U.S. Joint Declaration on Security, an important document defining the post-Cold War Japan-U.S. security arrangements. On this occasion, President Clinton made a speech on the deck of U.S. aircraft carrier Independence with the attendance of U.S. military members and JSDF members. In his speech, he stated that this declaration is to strengthen our alliance and prepare it for the challenges of the 21st century together. The following year, in September 1997, the 1978 guidelines for Japan-U.S. defense cooperation were revised for the first time. History has proven how those involved at that time made the right decisions at critical junctures. I would like to pay my sincere respect to them. The birth of this seminar paralleled significant events in the history of the alliance in the post-Cold War era, and this is by no means a coincidence. In fact, there was an underlying awareness among Japanese and U.S. government officials and experts that the post-Cold War Japan-U.S. security arrangements should be evaluated and given new significance. Since then, this seminar has worked as a forum for intellectual exchange of views on the Japan-U.S. security arrangements and related issues in a broad and diverse manner. And with each successive seminar, it has taken on more and more ambitious topics that were followed by actual discussions of the alliance, such as extended deadlines. Gradually, the discussions in this seminar have also influenced and supported the formulation of policies related to the alliance. I would now like to turn to the present state of the alliance. We stand at an inflection point in history. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has brought a complete end to the so-called post-Cold War era, and we are entering an era of turmoil, where the foundations of the existing international order are being shaken to the very core. We are at a critical junction where the decisions we make today will determine our future for decades to come. Under the strong leadership of Prime Minister Kishida, Japan has been working with the United States based on the national security strategy formulated at the end of 2022 and the joint statement of the Japan-U.S. Security Consultative Committee in January 2023. Our two governments have already clearly identified the way forward. We are discussing cooperation for, first, possession and operation of counter-strike capabilities. Second, alliance, coordination and command and control, AC3, with a view to establishing a permanent joint headquarters. 3. Defense of Southwest Islands. And 4. Expanding network of cooperation with allies and like-minded countries, with the U.S. and Japan working as a hub. Japan-U.S. ROK, Japan-U.S. Australia, Japan-U.S. Philippines, and the Quad are examples of such cooperation. At the Japan-U.S. Security Seminar last March, I understand that the participants agreed that the visions, priorities, and goals of the two countries have never been more aligned, and that implementation is of the utmost importance. We are now at the stage where Japan and the United States are making steady progress in the same direction. What is important now for the alliance is implementation, implementation, and implementation. And that needs to be accompanied by a sense of urgency. As Minister for Foreign Affairs, I assure you that I will do my utmost in this regard. Finally, I would like to say a few words about the future of the Japan-U.S. alliance. The environment surrounding the Japan-U.S. alliance has changed dramatically over the past 30 years, and its severity and complexity are increasing by the day. In the future, the military build-ups in the vicinity of Japan will advance rapidly, and gray zone situations over territories, cross-border cyber attacks on critical civilian infrastructure, and information warfare through spread of disinformation will constantly take place, thereby further blurring the boundary between contingency and peacetime. Furthermore, the scope of national security will expand to include fields such as economics and technology that were previously considered non-military. Thus, the boundary between military and non-military fields will no longer be clear-cut either. In the future, the environment may change so drastically that even the changes described here may seem obsolete. We need to stay ahead of the ever-changing security environment, and to do so, it is important to keep new and fresh perspectives. One example is WPS, or Women, Peace and Security. The future of the alliance lies in its constant efforts to transform itself. At the same time, some things do not change. That is the importance of the people who support the Japan-U.S. alliance. In this sense, it can be said that the future of the alliance lies also in the people. The Japan-U.S. alliance is supported by the dedicated civilians and military personnel in our governments, as well as intellectuals and citizens at large. It is the ties between these people that can weave the future of the alliance. The Japan-U.S. relationship has never been better, but it is precisely because of this situation that we must not fail to invest more in nurturing the people who will support the future of the alliance. Our predecessors often compared the Japan-U.S. alliance to gardening, and it is extremely important that we water it well and nurture the trust and friendship between our peoples to make the garden even more beautiful. Japan and the United States have nurtured the friendship and strengthened the alliance through a long-lasting and multi-layered people-to-people exchange. Former Prime Minister Abe also supported various exchange initiatives, such as the Kakehashi Project and the Tomodachi Initiative. Since 2017, we have also been implementing the Think of Okinawa's Future in the United States, or TOFU program for short. The program provides young people in Okinawa who will shape the future of that prefecture, with experience of being in direct contact with the United States from a young age. Nurturing people and fostering friendship, that is precisely what I expect most from the Japan-U.S. Security Seminar. I hope that the seminar will play an even more active role in fulfilling its important role of fostering young professionals and creating a network of experts. Thanks to the dedicated efforts of our respective peoples, the Japan-U.S. alliance has reached unprecedented heights. But we must not rest on our laurels. Let us look far into the distance with high ideals to take the alliance to new heights. And let us continue to work together to further enhance our alliance. In doing so, the Japan-U.S. Security Seminar will and must continue to play an important role. On the 20th anniversary of the seminar, Ambassador Armitage stated as follows: "The meetings have been a reliable barometer of concerns in the Japan-U.S. relationship. a microscope to explore problems, and a telescope to look over the horizon as issues and potential solutions. It has been a forum for candid exchange, out-of-box thinking, and creative problem solving. What Ambassador Armitage stated applies today, and I sincerely hope it will continue to do so in the future. Once again, I would like to thank you for this valuable opportunity. I would like to conclude my remarks by expressing my personal commitment to further advance the Japan-U.S. alliance. Thank you very much.
Choreography here. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone, and thanks to our in-person audience, our intrepid in-person audience on a stormy day here in Washington. Appreciate you here, and welcome also to our online audience around the world. I'm Chris Johnstone, Senior Advisor and Japan Chair here at CSIS, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this public portion of our U.S. Japan security seminar. I thought Foreign Minister Kamikawa's remarks were terrific in setting the stage for us. She was gracious enough to offer condolences to the United States for the loss of our service members, so I'd like from the U.S. side to offer our condolences to Japanese friends for what has been a difficult start to the year, an earthquake on January 1st, and then the tragic accident at Haneda Airport the next day. So hopefully the rest of the year will be better for both of us. Again, I want to welcome everyone. We have a terrific panel here today. We're going to do a mix of looking back, since this is the 30th anniversary of this event. We're going to look back on sort of how we got to where we are today in the U.S.-Japan alliance. And then we're going to reflect on some of the discussions yesterday about the critical issues that we face and how we might work more effectively to address them. But let me first start by introducing our really terrific panel, and I'll work my way across this way. Some of our guests will need no introduction, but nevertheless, to my right, Mori Satoru is a professor at Keio University. He was a senior fellow of the National Security Secretariat of the Cabinet Secretariat in the Japanese government, and he was among the experts called upon by the National Security Secretariat during the hearings in 2022 on the revision of Japan's strategic documents. He's a renowned scholar of international affairs and national security. Umemoto Kazuyoshi is president of the Japan Foundation. He was a career diplomat with service in a number of vital posts, including Director General of North American Affairs, Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, and Ambassador to Italy. Ambassador Tom Schieffer is founder and president of Envoy International LLC. He was ambassador to Australia from 2001 to 2005, and ambassador to Japan from 2005 to 2009. And finally, Dave Shear, Ambassador David Shear, is a senior associate at CSIS. He was Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia and Pacific Security Affairs from 2014 to 2016. And prior to 2014, he served for 32 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, most recently as the U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam. So quite a group we have here today. So as I said, I want to start by looking back a little bit. And maybe I'll start, Umemoto-san, if I may, with you, with a direct question. Kamikawa-san described the origins of this meeting, and I think you were part of this at creation in 1995. I wonder if you could share a little bit about the genesis of this meeting and what was behind it.
Of course, Genesis was, it's not so high-minded sort of intention and so on. I became a director for Japan-U.S. Security Treaty Division in 1994, and somehow, maybe towards the end of 1994, fiscal 1994, there was a rumor that Foreign Ministry Budget Division has some unused budget, so that the division wants somebody to use it for meaningful purposes. So we discussed among ourselves and we raised a hand. Let's start a dialogue on security. Because working in the security division, you have to do a lot of nitty-gritty mundane things. As Ambassador Armitage rightly pointed out, you have to have a microscope and a telescope. But most of the time, we had to spend on microscopic issues so that we can be, advise our ministers to properly answer the various questions from the opposition party in the Diet. So, so the budget, and then we wanted to have a meeting where we can discuss security issues in a much broader, with a broader perspective, informally. So somehow we got the money, and then we chose San Francisco as a venue because our great mentor, Ambassador Ryozo Kato, at the time was the Consul General in San Francisco. And we asked the Secretariat, we asked Japan, JIIA as a Japanese Secretariat, and we asked the Pacific Forum, at the time associated with CSIS, for the Secretariat. So that was the start of, and then, of course, we had not expected this to continue for 30 years. But somehow, I attended first 2 or 3 meetings. It was a wonderful event. Of course, you have to discuss some of the difficult issues related to the presence of U.S. forces, but you also can discuss long-term visions and so on. And also, that's where the ranks and the positions, you don't have to worry too much about it. So I was a still junior officer, but I had a chance to talk with Secretary Perry, and also some brief words with Mr. Gates, who would become Defense Secretary. So very informal discussion. So we really liked it. So that kind of format really helped us dealing with day-to-day issues. So maybe that's why this meeting has endured a 30-year history. So,
thank you. Dave, maybe I'll invite your perspective on this as well. You were involved at the time, and this was a period of some difficulty in the U.S. Japan relationship, right? So I think the term Foreign Minister Kamikawa used was alliance adrift. There was a book at the time about that.
Thanks, Chris. I think the perception at the time really was that the alliance was adrift. I was the political military officer on the Japan desk from 1992 to 1994, and then worked for Ambassador Mondale in the embassy as the chief of the embassy's political military affairs unit from 1994 to 97. And at the end of the George H.W. Bush administration, the beginning of the Clinton administration, and with the end of the Cold War, the focus in U.S.-Japan relations really shifted to the trade relationship, which was highly contentious, very difficult bilaterally, and of course very political, both in Washington and in Tokyo. And of course, with trade friction, the center of the, forming the center of the relationship. That's not a very good basis for good overall relations. So concerned people in both Tokyo and in Washington, I think, thought it was a good idea for the establishment of a forum like this, as well as real strong official efforts among the security-related people in both governments to strengthen the alliance. So prior to the late 80s, when we talked about the security relationship, usually we talked about doing what was necessary to maintain the political sustainability of U.S. forces in Japan. After the end of the Cold War, the Gulf War, and the Korean Missile Crisis, the scope of security discussions between Japan and the U.S. greatly expanded. And I think it was partly this forum, as well as strong official efforts, which helped us put that telescope together.
That's great. Well, let's fast forward a bit to sort of the post 9/11 period. And Ambassador Schieffer, you were present in Japan during that time and really at the height of the Koizumi era. And he was a unique figure, as we were talking about before we came out here. What are your recollections of that time, and what from your perspective, what made him different, and how did President Bush respond to him as a leader?
President Bush loved Prime Minister Koizumi, and Prime Minister Koizumi had him in his pocket from the first meeting at Camp David when the Prime Minister brought a glove and a baseball, and they played catch, and he was aware of President Bush's involvement in baseball and love of baseball and all that. And then, of course, the president discovered his love of Elvis Presley as he sang an Elvis Presley song and said that that's what he hoped the United States relationship with Japan would be like, as in Love Me Tender. And the president laughed. And they both had a great sense of humor, which I think played a part in their friendship. And they really were friends, and they really did like each other. It was not a facade. It was not a official language sort of thing. They could talk to each other. And one of the things that fascinated the president was the narrative that came with their friendship, because both of their fathers had been in the Pacific, and both had been in war. And the irony of it was that if the two fathers had met each other, they would have been mortal enemies. And what the president liked was the fact that they were such good friends, and they were both working for peace in the Pacific. And so I think that a lot of people don't give George Bush credit for this, but I think he deserves it. He came to the presidency with a full vision of what he wanted to do in Asia, and Japan was central to that. His father, after all, had been the first minister to Beijing in China, and he had visited China, and he was well aware of all that. And he understood that for us to be successful, I'm talking about the United States to be successful in the Pacific, Japan was central to our security, and that we were central to Japan's security. And it coincided with a period with Koizumi, who I thought was a very far-thinking individual. He was the kind of politician that really could look over the horizon and see what was coming. And he talked about, when he came to office, that he wanted Japan to be a normal country again. And that phrase has kind of been forgotten now, but it was really a cornerstone of what his prime ministership was about. What I took that to mean, and I think what the president took it to mean, was that Japan had become an economic power in the world, and that was recognized. But Japan had more to project in the world than just economic policy. And Prime Minister Koizumi, I think, wanted Japan to be recognized for the ability to do things in the political arena that would bring peace and security in the area. And the president wholeheartedly believed that to be the case. When he left office, and in my judgment, he never told me this, but in my judgment, he wanted Abe-san to succeed him. And he had been his chief cabinet secretary right before that. So I had gotten to know Prime Minister Abe quite well as chief cabinet secretary, because I was there during his first term. And I think that Abe-san also said he wanted Japan to be a normal country again, and with the same intent. Unfortunately, I think illness cut his prime ministership short before he was able to accomplish some of the things that he had long thought about. When he came back to office, I think that he had thought a long time about what he wanted Japan's place to be in the world. And I think he also, having basically not failed, but really not succeeded the first time he was prime minister, I think he wanted, if he had a chance to do it again, I think he was determined to do something, and he did. And I guess the short answer to the question is Koizumi, Abe, each of them did something that moved the process along and dramatically moved it along to where we are today. And I think Prime Minister Kishida has advanced the ball yet again. And it's the same sense of wanting Japan to have influence in the world as it should, as a normal nation would, as every other nation in the world aspires to do. And I think one of the interesting things about all the things that we've talked about and talked about yesterday and the security aspects of it, isn't it odd that the only country that has seemed to object to Japan's talking about security today is China? There's been no condemnation anywhere else in the world. In fact, I think that the war is finally over, and Japan has taken its rightful place among the leading countries of the world. And I think it is something that we should appreciate and admire from the United States standpoint. And I think it also has contributed greatly to the possibilities of continued peace and stability in the Pacific.
Really well said. I think it underscores the importance of leadership, right? Individual leadership at the right time. I remember I was a note taker in the embassy working for you, Ambassador, when the Director of National Intelligence, Negroponte, visited. And I will never forget the meeting that those two had. And the charisma that Koizumi had. He wasn't necessarily steeped in intelligence, but he was eager to learn, and they had a terrific conversation.
Yeah, and he was, when the last meeting, I attended the last summit that they had in Washington, and the president wanted to have state dinner in his honor because of their relationship and all that. And the president told me afterwards that the meeting that we had in the Oval Office was the finest meeting that he had had with any leader because they went around the world and they discussed it. And there, you know, summits are kind of like plays. They're kind of written beforehand, and this person says that, and that person's response is expected to be this, and I think it wasn't like that at all in that meeting. And it went along, and it was actually, we were supposed to, I think they were supposed to meet for an hour in the Oval Office, and then there was going to be another hour in which there were a number of people that were going to be brought in and all that. And Koizumi said, this is unusual for a leader. Koizumi said, I'm enjoying this conversation, Mr. President, and this is really going well, and I just assumed we stayed in the Oval Office, and you're welcome to bring in all the people that are waiting out on your side. We don't need any more. The president said, well, I don't need any more. And they went on. And it was back and forth. What do you think about China? What do you think about North Korea? What do you think about the world? And they went around the world, and they had an exchange of views. And the important thing about that was you got over the formality of the summit, which can often sometimes be stifling to the conversation or the understanding between. None of that occurred. It was an exchange between friends. They were candid. They were not shy about problems, but they talked about how can we solve these problems. And the solution, in my judgment, is always the more you talk, the more you're together, the more you understand each other, the better chances for success.
Great. I want to go back to Umemoto-san and Ambassador Shear before I bring Professor Morty into this for just a little more of your personal take on various moments. Umemoto-san, you know, the period after Koizumi was kind of a difficult one, right? We had a series of prime ministers in Japan, including Abe's first run, then the period of the DPJ. We, of course, came out of it successfully, but I wonder as you look back on that era, and you were close to the alliance in that time, what factors, drivers do you think were important in getting us through? And what was the role of leadership in getting us through?
Yes, of course, you know, when DPJ came into power, I was a DG for North America. they came to power without much preparation. So after many years of discussion, we had come to an agreement on how we deal with the base issues, the Phtenma and all other bases. But somehow, Mr. Hatoyama thought that, well, maybe there should be a different way. So he rather, in retrospect, casually tried to find another alternative. And then we sort of, we means, Japan and the U.S. relations also started to adrift a little bit, because we spent hundreds of hours leaving no stones unturned, and then came to a conclusion. So even if it's a prime minister's sort of idea, the reality cannot be changed. But the basic thing that was to, of course, they had no intention of damaging the alliance. But somehow they wanted to solve certain issues in a different way. So that was a process of how we came to that conclusion. And of course, then we had to explain a sort of each U.S. basis, major base, what kind of role that each basis would play in a kind of contingency. So the gist of contingency planning, so when some contingency happens in the neighborhood of Japan, these movements are likely to occur, and these places will play a very important role. So we asked USFJ and US Embassy extra miles to explain in detail. Then I think Foreign Minister Okada at the time, Defense Minister Kitazawa were persuaded. Well, unfortunately, there is no other choice. And they tried to persuade Prime Minister Hatoyama, but they couldn't. So that's what happened. But in the end, DPJ government stayed with the alliance, stayed with the agreement, maybe grudgingly, but recognizing that's the only way to go forward. And then, since then, I think that they made a lot of contribution to the alliance as well, because Secretary Clinton, Secretary Gates spent so many hours to discuss various issues. So I think that kind of detailed dialogue among the ministers led to a kind of mutual trust, which is drives forth, which made possible for us to make some progress.
Yeah.
But that was really a hard time.
Yeah, it was a hard
And during that time, of course, this seminar also played a very important role. You know, this seminar, you can explore new ideas, you can test some of the ideas, and then find out the common ground. So in order to overcome various difficulties, this seminar turned out to be very, very useful.
Yeah, sort of a safety valve to let some of the,
Yes.
the pressure out. No, I think your point about the DPJ is important. We did some important work together during the DPJ years. The post-Fukushima, of course, cooperation, also an
Right,
important base
right.
agreement in 2012. Dave, let me ask you about the Abe period. You were Assistant Secretary of Defense. Did Washington get the opportunity it had with Abe from the beginning? How did you, from your vantage, how did you see both the building, the Pentagon, but also the national security establishment sort of respond to the Abe era?
I think we got the opportunity. We had known then Prime Minister Abe for some years as a member of the Diet and as Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary and then Chief Cabinet Secretary. He had, by the time he became Prime Minister, he had worked with generations of Americans in building the alliance. I think Prime Minister Abe had a lifelong commitment to the alliance and to the strengthening of Japan's military capabilities. So we recognize that, and I think we got to work with Prime Minister Abe pretty soon after he became Prime Minister the second time. And that, of course, resulted for Japan domestically in the reinterpretation of the Constitution, and for Japan-U.S. bilateral security relations in the new 2015 guidelines. And of course, there was the issuance in 2013 of the new Japanese national security strategy. So that was a very, very important time. And I think both sides recognized the opportunity Prime Minister Abe's presence in office presented, and we worked on it very hard. And I have to say that maintaining and growing a relationship like this, of course, requires strong leadership, and we've seen that repeatedly since the beginning of the alliance. But it also takes, it has taken generations of committed diplomats, both in the State Department and in the Foreign Ministry, and in defense diplomats in our defense ministries as well. It's taken generations to build this, of committed working level people to build this alliance.
Great, thanks. Professor Mori, I want to bring you into this. As you think about this arc of the last 30 years to where we were in 1995, where we are today, how do you think about the evolution of the alliance? Was this inevitable for the structural reasons, the rise of China, threats from North Korea? Were we inevitably going to find ourselves in this spot? Or was leadership important? How do you think about the mix of factors that got us to where we are today? As the scholar in the room,
yes.
Help us think about this from a big
yes.
picture.
Yes. I think if you look over not only the past 30 years, but if you were to sort of focus on the last 10 years, I would say that both structural factors, like as you mentioned, North Korea and China, as well as political leadership by Japanese prime ministers and the U.S. president played a significant role. And I think the leadership element is, in a way, much sort of relatively more important, because if you don't have the necessary political decisions to change the institutions and move various kinds of initiatives forward, despite the fact that you have increasingly challenging security environment, you would not have the necessary tools and institutions to actually push the alliance forward. So I think the two most important factors driving the alliance over the past decade or so would be, as you mentioned, China and Abe. I think various countries have undergone what I would call wake-up events regarding China. And for Japan, I think it was the 2010 Senkaku fishing boat incident. And I think after that, Japan's national defense program guidelines started to sort of shift towards the southwestern region. And, we started off with the Senkaku issues. And back then, I sort of recall that, attending some of these symposiums and events in Washington, and I would talk about Senkaku Islands, and some of my American colleagues would say, why are you so hyped up about a bunch of uninhabited islands? And that was the kind of atmosphere at the beginning. But as the South China Sea issue came to the fore, and China started doing land reclamations, I think the United States became more concerned. I think towards the second term of the Obama administration, the Obama administration actually started to challenge the international legality of the so-called 9 dash lines. And I think from that point on, I think Japan and the United States sort of came to sort of synchronize their perception of China. And then came the challenge of Belt and Road Initiative, where people started talking about debt trap. And then eventually, we also started talking about the challenges of technology, telecommunication networks. And then after that, finally, you have Chinese crackdown on Hong Kong, and also a Russian invasion of Ukraine that kind of sort of put the Taiwan issue on the spot. And those were some of the developments regarding China that kind of sort of created an environment where the alliance could sort of develop. But I think one of the most significant political decision by Japan to sort of push forward the alliance was the 2015 security legislation. That was the landmark accomplishment by Prime Minister Abe. And I think that sort of, through the reinterpretation of the Constitution to allow collective self-defense, and also sort of establish all the legal construct necessary to sort of respond to various contingencies, put the alliance in the proper place. And that actually enabled us to sort of deal with the current challenges. The 2022 discussions were made possible because we had done the homework back in 2015. And I think without that kind of Prime Minister Abe's decision to invest his political capital in 2014-15 period to actually make that change, we wouldn't be here. So I think that political leadership element by Prime Minister Abe was very, very important. So that would be my assessment.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well now let's transition to a discussion of the issues on our plate today. I think the good news, right, is that as we've discussed here, the relationship is better than it really ever has been from an alliance standpoint, but the bad news is that the challenges we face are more daunting than ever. And my admonition to the group yesterday in our discussions was not to spend the day patting ourselves on the back, but to think about how we accelerate what we're doing and think about what more we should be doing. And we had a pretty wide-ranging discussion. We talked about the wars in the Middle East, the ongoing war in Ukraine, the China-Russia nexus, the new Russia-DPRK nexus, an increasingly assertive China, elections in Taiwan coming next weekend. So there's a lot going on. So let me start with a broad question, first to our Japanese guests and then to our Americans. How do you assess, to our Japanese friend, Mori-sensei and Umemoto-san, how do you assess the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy as we come to the end of this term? What do you see as its strengths? Where do you think we need to see adjustments, new dimensions? Maybe Mori-sensei, can I start with you and then go to Umemoto-san?
Yes, I think there are strengths and some areas you need more effort to put in. And so if you look at the strength, I think the Biden administration has been very successful at forging various kinds of unilateral frameworks or coalition building, so to speak. I think elevating of the significance of the Quad is one thing, launching of AUKUS, pushing forward with various kinds of trilaterals, including Japan, ROK in Japan, as well as Japan, U.S., and Australia, and so forth. So in that area, I think the Biden administration has been very successful in building what they call the lattice work of partnerships in the region. And apparently the Chinese hate it, but it is sort of a sign that we are doing good in the competition area. But on the other hand, I think speaking with my colleagues back in Tokyo, there are some worries when the Biden administration talks about democracy versus autocracy, because in some ways it does sort of alienate some non-democratic states that who are important partners in various areas like Vietnam and other countries. And the other perhaps weakness would be the economic area people talk about. IPEF is out there, and I think it should be pushed forward, but it has met obstacles at home regarding trade and so forth. So trade liberalization, I think, now has a sort of a bipartisan story situation right now. And we sort of hope that if the United States were able to open its market and advance its trade liberalization, U.S. would have more influence in the region. But unfortunately, due to domestic political reasons, the United States cannot do that. So I think those are some of the strengths and perhaps the weaknesses that I see. But overall, I think the Biden administration's effort to sort of compete with China responsibly has been a success. And quite frankly, I think the current Biden administration's approach is striking the right tone for Japan, and also probably for other countries in Southeast Asia, in the sense that the Biden administration is not too hawkish, but not too soft on China. I think it's, generally speaking, I would say that we are pretty much on the same page about how to deal with China. Not only compete and deter, but also sort of try to engage and seek cooperation and dialogue in some areas. That's probably the sort of the optimal sort of posture an orientation to engage China that can forge a wide support in the region. So that would be my assessment. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Umemoto-san, would you like to, and then I'll ask our American friends about the Japanese strategy.
Well, I cannot agree more with what Professor Mori just said. And yesterday, I think there was a kind of consensus, sort of, what happens in Europe will affect, Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, and vice versa, and so on. So there's a connection between what happens in other parts of the world and also what happens in this part of the world, meaning in the Pacific. And I have left the government for some time, so this is my total personal view. But I think after the Bush administration and Obama and so on, I think the Biden administration, the commitment to Indo-Pacific is very firm. Of course, we understand that the U.S. as a global power has to spend a lot of time and energy on Europe or the Middle East. But I think fundamental recognition that the future of the U.S. is in the Pacific. And this position is made clear from time to time. So that's very reassuring. So that's something that I very much personally appreciate.
It's going to be tested in the year ahead, given the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. But yes, certainly that's right. How about perspectives from our American friends on Japan's national security strategy? I think it's clearly historic, large increases in defense spending. We're entering year 2 of implementation. I guess the question is, are we moving fast enough and focused on the right things? Ambassador Schieffer, could I invite you to offer some thoughts based on the discussions yesterday?
Yeah. When I first read the security documents that came out in 2022, I just couldn't believe it. It was in the public arena, in a very sophisticated, very thoughtful expression of what Japan wanted to do. And I contrasted that with earlier years. And, I was there a good while ago. And there were things in that document that I just thought I would never see the Japanese say. But I think it was a recognition that it's Japan's turn to be on the global stage again, and not just in Asia, but the global stage again. And I think that's a positive, very positive thing, because I think Japan has a great deal to contribute. From our standpoint, American foreign policy has traditionally looked to Europe first. And I think that had to do with we were a British colony, and it was natural. And basically, Europe was in the ascendancy in the 20th century. And we looked first to Europe and then to Asia. I think what is happening, and I think it's a very positive thing with our foreign policy, is that America is learning to turn to Asia, because the world economy is turning to Asia. And that it will be, and in my lifetime, and believe me, I'm an old man, that the 4 of the 5 largest economies in the world will be in Asia, and America will be the only one that will be one of the largest economies in the world. With that goes political capital, and it has to be understood, and it's a transition, and we have to be prepared for that. I'm talking about America as being prepared for it. But it is so rewarding to see that Japan wants to be a part of that and wants to be a global influence around the world, not just in Asia. And I think it was very interesting in all of this that on the morning that Xi Jinping was in Moscow, Prime Minister Kishida was in Kyiv. That wasn't by accident. And that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. Probably wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. But to me, that is really a dramatic change. And, for all the problems that we have in the United States and all the problems we have in Japan, I wouldn't switch places with the Chinese. We have, in the United States, we have a terrible problem on our border. And something has to be done. It has to get better. But there is one thing that you notice about that. People are trying to get into the United States. I don't know that the Chinese have a big border problem. I don't think the North Koreans have a big border problem of people trying to get in. And I don't think we should lose sight of that fact. We have a lot to contribute to the betterment of the world, to the international order, and the two of us together can make and have a dramatic impact on the future chances of peace in the world. And we have that opportunity. We have to seize it. We have to build upon it. But thank goodness it is we that have that choice and not others.
Dave, do you want to offer some observations?
On Japanese.
Yeah, on Japan's national security strategy, where we are.
I've been trying to think of where Japan falls short these days, and I can't think of anything. Traditionally, we would sit down with the Japanese and we'd say things like, in a Korean contingency, we need X, Y, and Z. And the Japanese side would say, you need what? We have to revise our laws in order for us to support you on that. I don't think that's the case anymore. So at a very basic level, military to military cooperation, defense diplomacy, the United States and Japan are very closely in tune. And after all, we share larger regional and global strategic goal in promoting free and open Indo-Pacific. So I think the U.S. Japan alliance, both in its military and in its diplomatic aspects now, is stronger than it's ever been. And again, as Chris said, the bad news is that the rise of China and the continued development of nuclear weapons and testing of missiles and nuclear weapons by North Korea. These are all serious problems, but the U.S.-Japan relationship, I think, has risen to the challenge. And I think we'll continue to rise to the challenge given the strength of the progress we've seen.
A couple of more questions from up here, and then we'll open this up to the floor. But let me ask, and maybe I'll direct this question to Mori-sensei and Dave in particular, and the next one to Umemoto-san and Ambassador Schieffer. But there's a big election next weekend, really big election. The world's eyes will be on Taiwan. And of course, the question of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is increasingly a focus of the U.S.-Japan alliance conversation. So, Mori-sensei, how should we as an alliance think about approaching a new government in Taipei? What steps should we be thinking about to reinforce deterrence? What messages, if any, should we be sending as an alliance to China? We talked yesterday a bit about this mix of deterrence and assurance. Welcome your thoughts on this as we approach a pretty important day.
Yes. So if I may, I'd like to sort of start off with the deterrence piece. I think there are already efforts underway between the United States and Japan to sort of bolster our defense capability. Particularly on the Japanese side, to bolster our defense capabilities and also strengthen the alliance and also strengthen security cooperation with third countries. And this kind of effort needs to move on to sort of strengthen the capability side, because it's both capability and intentional. And on the capability side, I think most of the efforts that need to be put in place to bolster the deterrence has been put in place in the strategic documents, including national security strategy and the national defense strategy. Some of the pieces will include things like making the ability to effect combined joint operations between the United States and Japan by introducing what they call the all-domain operation concept, and also enabling U.S. forces to be deployed into Japan, the force gesture moving forward. The United States is going to have this Marine Littoral Regiment in Japan, and also watercraft companies in Yoko and so forth. So those are new developments. And thirdly, I think what needs to be done on the intention side, what kind of messages should we be sending to China? I think there should be two. One is, we have been seeing a lot of military coercion, economic coercion, and also information operation, disinformation by China against Taiwan. And this situation has been going on for some time, and I think there should be more discussion about how to deal with this situation on the one hand. I don't think, my personal view is that I don't think we have enough discussion about how to deal with this sort of come up with a counter-coercion strategy vis-a-vis China over Taiwan. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think both the US government and the Japanese government are, have the will and the resolve to deal with any sort of crisis that could potentially happen over Taiwan. But I'm not quite sure whether the public is ready. I sometimes wonder, no society is ever ready for a great power conflict, but I think there needs to be a higher awareness to sort of think about what Taiwan security means for Japanese security on the Japanese side, I think. There's this phrase about, Taiwan contingency is Japan's contingency, and many people have talked about, the military fallout from a potential conflict in Taiwan. And if you hear that kind of discussion, the public gets scared. And they don't want to, sacrifice their lives in the process of trying to defend Taiwan and so forth. But I think we have to reframe this thinking. What I mean by that, because if you have this thinking that Taiwan security is actually divisible from Japanese security, China will be able to, effect information operation and send messages like, why does Japanese have to die to defend Taiwan and so forth. And that's going to have a sort of a huge impact on Japanese public opinion. So what I mean by sort of reframing the debate is to try to think about, what would the world look like if Taiwan falls under Chinese control? And I think, personally, you can come up with various stories, but at least if the PLA starts operating out of Taiwan in the Pacific, I think the U.S. force posture will have to dramatically change, which means that the U.S. ability to defend Taiwan is going to be dramatically reduced. So that's bad for Japan. Number two, I think Japan would be opposed to forceful unification of Taiwan by China. So China will probably use different kind of leverage to apply pressure on Japan to make Japan accept Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan. And that means, economic pressure, various kinds of pressure waged against Japan, which means that Japan's going to be sort of forced into, choosing between, pressured into this very difficult situation. And that's going to be meaning Japan losing the independence and the right to decide its own policy vis-a-vis. So that's the possible Chinese regional hegemony, the consequences of China taking control over Taiwan. And if you start thinking in those terms, you come to realize that the future of Taiwan is directly connected to the future of Japan. And if you have that kind of recognition, you start building resolve to resist sort of aggression and be willing to assume the risks and costs of facing a Taiwan contingency. And so the public opinion needs to sort of think about what Taiwan means for Japan much more deeply. And by doing that, having that kind of conversation will send a strong signal to China that Japan really seriously thinks that it should be involved in the security, not only of Taiwan, but in the Western Pacific and so forth. So that public opinion, public discussion piece is, I think, very important in bolstering deterrence vis-a-vis China regarding Taiwan. And that needs to be worked on much more. So, yeah, I've been speaking too long, so I'll stop here.
That's great. Yeah, this question of public opinion, I think, applies to the United States, too.
Mm-hmm.
American people probably need to, understand sort of the implications of a Taiwan that's occupied by China and what that would mean for the United States as well. Dave.
Well, people in Washington like to describe our approach to the Taiwan Strait as a policy of strategic ambiguity. I don't really like that term. I prefer the term dual deterrence. We're engaged in an effort to deter the Chinese from resorting to force to resolve their problem in the Taiwan Strait, and we're determined to deter people on Taiwan from officially declaring independence. And that approach has maintained stability in the Taiwan Strait for decades. And I think Japan is playing a stronger and stronger role in both of those efforts to implement dual deterrence in the Taiwan Strait. I think a third element of that is to encourage both sides of the strait to resume dialogue and to try and resolve their differences peacefully. So I think the United States and Japan have a critical role in all three of those legs that support stability in the Taiwan Strait, now more than ever. And I think it's going to become more critical as well.
Right. Thank you.
And let me just add that for both Japan and the United States, I think in a free and open, in a policy in which we pursue a free and open Indo-Pacific, deterrence in the Taiwan Strait, whatever you call it, is only a piece. It's not the be-all and end-all of the strategy. We're engaged in a broad array of activities, including mini-lateral activities with the ROK and the Philippines and Australia and India that not only contribute to security in the Taiwan Strait, but contribute to peace and stability in the region as a whole. Furthermore, I think Japan is doing things in areas like Southeast Asia that are conducive to establishing a free and open Indo-Pacific that the United States just doesn't have the time or the resources to do. So I think Japan, and for which the U.S. is performing, in many cases, a supporting role of Japan's diplomacy. So our efforts are complementary across the board.
Let me ask one more question, and then we'll open this up to the room, and then I'll come back at the end, ask each of you briefly to say what you think of ought to be our priorities in this relationship in 2024. But for Umemoto-san and for Ambassador Schieffer, on this theme of minilateralism, this is a conference that's U.S. Japan, it's a bilateral conference, and of course our alliance is bilateral, but increasingly it's our connections to other relationships that are so vital, right? Dave mentioned the trilateral with the ROK, with Australia. Maybe I could ask each of you for your thoughts about how we continue to build this lattice work, this minilateral lattice work. Ambassador Schieffer, you're sort of unique in having been ambassador of both Australia and Japan. So maybe I start with you for your thoughts on this.
I think the real strength of American foreign policy around the world is the recognition that we can't do it alone and that we have to have allies. And I think you've seen that strengthened recently. And if you look at Putin's invasion of Ukraine, what has it produced? A NATO that is clearly a deterrent. Maybe not to a war starting, but it's awfully hard to get past NATO and the United States, and Russia is seeing that. If you look into Asia, I would argue that Xi Jinping might well have thought that putting pressure on Hong Kong or doing what he did to Hong Kong would make Taiwan easier. It made it a lot harder. And I think any objective view of that or examination of that would confirm that. Now, do I expect Xi Jinping to make a declaration of, I made a mistake? I don't think so. But it made it a lot harder. And I know there's talk about China and Russia and Iran and North Korea all having some sort of semi-alliance. There's one thing that I've noticed in history about alliances among strong men. They have a hard time kind of deciding on who's number one. And because every one of them wants to be the center of attention. And while I don't take that combination lightly, I think we're on the side of success in pursuing alliances and strengthening alliances much more than they are. And my experience in Australia and the Australian-American alliance is extraordinary, and it has been since the war. But it grows and it strengthens. And the Five Eyes position that Australia has in our intelligence network is an extraordinary experience. I hope the day is not far away that Japan will be the sixth set of eyes that are a part of that intelligence, because it really is extraordinary. I've seen it in action. I've seen it in war. and the consequences it has. And I think the final thing I would say is we talk about war, we talk about security. We're not planning a war here. We're planning what will deter a war. And that's very important to remember, and it's very important for us to emphasize, because I think neither Japan nor the United States is a warlike country. I don't think their populations want war because they've experienced war and the tragedies of war. I think they want peace, and I think that recognition that peace comes through deterrence is what is bringing us all together now, and I think it still has a powerful opportunity to have success in the future.
Thank you. It's great. Umemoto-san? Lattice work.
Yeah. Minilaterals. I think to have a certain third party or other than Japan and the US would give us a different perspective. From Australia, the perspective is from under. So that gives us additional value of how other countries view the situation and so on. And of course, there are many things that we can work together with those partners. So it's quite useful. And then, as Ambassador Schieffer just said, the alliance is not the objective itself. This is the basic structure to deter war. And in order to deter war, I think we also have to think how we can avoid miscalculations. I'm fond of reading history, although recently I haven't had much time to read. But is it Mark Twain who said the history doesn't repeat itself, but history often rhymes? So the situation of Korean contingency versus Taiwan street contingency, those were early 50s. Similar kind of different context, but similar kind of situation existed. And Soviet Union was there, PRC was there. So of course, history doesn't repeat itself. But I think what we can try to do is to avoid miscalculations, avoid nations to make a stupid decision. So in order to do that, of course, the firm alliance would make the calculation of potential adversaries, of the potential cost of whatever decision they make. So in that sense, deterrence and alliance is very important. But also, I personally think that, of course, that dialogue with those adversaries are also important. A different kind of, so of course, U.S. position on Iran, we know that. But still, I think to have a communication with Iran would be important. To have communication with North Korea may be important. How to do that is very difficult. But once we have a very solid alliance structure, then that would give us more room for many dialogues with potential adversaries, so that we can avoid the possibility of miscalculations.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, well, now I'd like to open it up to the room. We have a microphone over here, so I'm going to make people who want to ask questions wander over to the microphone, if that's okay. But very glad. Ambassador Hubbard, behind you is the microphone, sir? Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for putting together this excellent discussion and for inviting me. I was wondering at one point this morning why I came out on this awful day when I could have watched this from home on my computer, but I realized that one of the reasons was to see old friends like Ambassador Umemoto and Shear, Schieffer, et cetera, and I realized when I got here that it's a good thing I came because really I had forgotten, did not realize that this was the 30th anniversary of that meeting we had in San Francisco in 1994. I think that meeting was occasioned, as Ambassador Umemoto said, by some bureaucratic reasons. On his side, budgetary reasons, excess money. On our side, as Ambassador Shear said, we were looking for a way I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at that time, I was responsible in that position for both trade issues and the security issues, and I think all of us thought that somehow the security issues had not gotten the amount of attention that they deserved, that we were adrift, and we were all looking for a way to go off and talk about that with our Japanese counterparts. And it was a good thing the Japanese were paying for it, because we didn't have to. That enabled us to say, hey, we're just invitees. We're not doing this. So anyway, thank you, Ambassador Umemoto, for putting that together, coming up with the idea. I was also on that President Clinton's trip to Japan in '96, where we issued the Declaration on the Security Relationship. I think I played a role in drafting that declaration, and was pleased to see a very happy meeting in Tokyo, where President Clinton and President Hashimoto talked both about trade and about security. And one of the things that hasn't been mentioned is that was where we sort of came up with the solution to the Tenma problem. It's not yet a reality, but we all worked together to come up with an idea that has lasted. I went very soon after that to be ambassador to the Philippines and later to Korea, so I didn't participate in subsequent security dialogues with Japan, but I've been, just as Ambassador Schieffer said, what we've seen over the last year or so in Japan's policy is literally unimaginable for those of us who worked hard in the relationship. And I began I began actually in the late 1960s. And, I'm amazed at what Japan has decided to do. I'm really amazed at the initiative that Japan has taken. This is one example, this security conference. You made that happen by taking that initiative, but even the many laterals that we're talking about, I think Japan kind of took the lead on putting together the Quad, bringing Australia and India in the fray. I think Japan took the lead basically in stepping in and helping us with the Philippines, where we've had our ups and downs in the relationship. But that relationship with the Philippines is now more important to all of us, given the Taiwan situation, South China Sea issue, than it has been in the past. And I'm very pleased that Japan took the initiative in putting together this trilateral. And I guess my question is, I'd like to hear a little more about Japan's thinking on that issue and other issues in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
So the question is on Japan's thinking about minilateralism in Southeast Asia. Yeah, okay. Umemoto-san, would you like to?
I'm not in government, so,
Yeah, okay.
so maybe a slightly different perspective. I'm now head of the Japan Foundation. The Japan Foundation's activities are cultural and people-to-people exchanges. So in the last 50th anniversary of the Japan-ASEAN friendship, there was a special summit meeting in Tokyo. And in that meeting, Prime Minister Kishida launched a new initiative called, what was that? The partnership to create a new, created future with new generations. So in which we would start various exchange programs with ASEAN countries, together with India and Australia. So as Foreign Minister Kamikawa said, whatever we do, we need people to do that, really. So investment in people is very important. So of course, so what we do from the Japan Foundation is not talking about the security or multilateral, but at least if we can construct and enhance the network of people between Japan and ASEAN, India, Australia, and possibly with the U.S., that would help trying to do many, many things with these countries. So that would provide infrastructure of people with which we can achieve many things. So, so this may not be the answer to your question, but because I am now out of the government, so I cannot talk about it well. But at least I think government and public sector is very much aware of improving communications and people-to-people contacts among the Indo-Pacific community. So I hope that this will contribute to whatever we try to do with multilaterals or bilaterals and so on. So maybe somebody else can add to my work.
I'm going to exert moderator's prerogative and just do one more. Please forgive me. Please, last question, and then we'll do wrap-up comments here about the way forward.
Lin Chang-che with the Voice of America. Tensions are rising on the Korean Peninsula with North Korea firing artillery rounds for 3 days and South Korea responding likewise. What more can the U.S., South Korea, and Japan do together militarily to maintain peace in the region when the tensions are rising on the Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
Good question. We haven't really focused on the U.S. Japan ROK trilateral, but Mori-sensei, may I invite you to talk about how we strengthen deterrence on the peninsula? We focus so much on China these days, sometimes we forget the very real threat across the ocean there.
Yes, I think all the initiatives that came out from the Camp David meeting last year needs to be implemented. And I think the most recent, one of the most recent initiatives is the data sharing regarding ballistic missile launcher and so forth. So that needs to move forward. I think there could be more joint training and exercises. It's been going on for some time, and I think it's going to be upgraded, and that needs to be moving forward as well. So those are probably the two main pillars that I would say. It's already been announced, but I think the implementation is very important and sort of sending a consistent signal. But one of the worries that we have is, the kind of technological assistance that Russia is providing to North Korea. And this is going to be presenting North Korea as a much more formidable security challenge. And so the trilateral, the three countries need to continue engaging in discussions about how to, enhance our deterrence vis-a-vis North Korea. So that would be my general.
One of our speakers yesterday referred to the grouping of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran as the axis of upheaval, which I think is a pretty good framing. Okay, we're basically out of time. What I want to do is invite each of our speakers' final thoughts, and in particular focused on what should be some near-term priorities in the relationship with U.S. and Japan. Maybe, Dave, if I could start with you, and we'll work our way this way.
Just 3 quick points, I think. One is the importance of the overall regional strategy for both Japan and the United States. Taiwan and the stability in the Taiwan Strait are critically important, but that issue is only a piece of a broader strategy, which requires the United States and Japan to consult very closely on a range of issues and work those minilateral relationships. Second, again, it takes strong visionary leadership in order to maintain and build an alliance like this, but it also takes committed cadres of diplomats in each government, generations of them, to strengthen this alliance. And Umemoto-san is one of them. And we've known each other since like 1993. It takes people like us also to maintain this alliance, and I'm glad to say that in looking at the younger generation, there's a new generation of committed people coming up who are very impressive.
Umemoto-san?
When we sort of started this dialogue We also hoped that this would give opportunity for people from business community to have some dialogue with people in the security community. Maybe that's where that we have to make some additional efforts. Because now the security issue is closely connected with economic issues. So maybe we should think about how best we can provide that sort of opportunity for security and economic business people.
Yeah, economic security issues are so central, we need to have business voices at the table. So I think that's good homework for us to think about. Ambassador Schieffer?
Well, as the Foreign Minister said, implementation, implementation, implementation. We have an extraordinary agenda before us that wouldn't have existed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. We have to seize this opportunity, and we have to recognize that it won't be a linear progression here. We're going to have some bumps in the road. There's going to be politics that are going to intervene. And this next year, there are going to be elections in the United States. There may very well be an election in Japan. And elections don't often turn on foreign policy. They turn on local issues. And I think we have to be aware that while we're all concerned about these issues and they're top of our agenda, they may not be in the top of the agendas of the people who will be electing the next set of leaders. And we have to be concerned about that, but we have to also have a voice here and explain why it is that this is in the interest of the Japanese people, why it is in the interest of the American people to have these kind of alliances, and what that does for the security of both our countries. It is a security multiplier for both our countries. And the more that we are able to do, the more we are able to demonstrate that to the publics, I think the better the outcome is likely to be for the elections. The last thing I would say is I think we really need to explore more the ability to get young people together, and for young Japanese to be in America and for Americans to be in Japan. And I think that is the greatest possibility for success there is likely to be in the private sector. And many of you sit out there today as representatives of the private sector. This is something that is good for everybody. And it would involve the security of the United States and Japan 20, 30, 40 years from now, because that's what we've seen happen when people get together and have a common vision of what peace should be and how it can be achieved.
Thank you. Mori-sensei, last word.
Yes, two quick comments. One, for this year, I just want to come back to this Taiwan issue. I think if this military coercion keeps going on, we may have to think about taking steps that have been previously considered very sensitive, like engaging the Taiwanese. I don't think this current situation where we have no official dialogue with the Taiwanese can allow to be going on forever if China kind of continues this pattern of coercion against Taiwan. If they start initiating expansive military exercises and training around Taiwan that undermine security and stability of the Western Pacific, I think new steps might have to be taken. And I think that's an issue that we have to think about sort of pushing the envelope to respond to rising challenges in the security arena. Second point is we've been talking about how the alliances engages other countries and other regions in the region. But I think we have to engage ourselves. I think Japanese need to go to the United States, not only in Washington, but also to other states, talking about what Japan means for the United States. And I think it would be better, and even better, if we have American experts come over to Japan and talk about the meaning of the United States for Japanese security. And that effort, I think, needs to continue, given our domestic political climate, talking about more of a sort of a nationalistic, unilateralistic perspectives being sometimes introduced by certain politicians into these foreign policy debates. So those are two things I think that should be where we should be putting in more effort moving forward this year.
And again, the people dimension, and I couldn't agree more on your statement about deepening the national security channels with Taiwan. I think that's homework for both of us. Well, we've come to the end of our time. Let me thank again the Japan Institute for International Affairs for working with us for all these years on this great event. Thank our panelists. I want to thank Dave Shear in particular because Sheila Smith was supposed to be with us today. So we drafted Dave at last minute for double duty. So thank you, but thanks to all of our panelists and thanks to all of you for joining. Please join me in a round of applause for our group.